Hey George, how are ya?
John, hi, how are you?
I'm pretty good. Still in the middle of my summer vacation, enjoying it very much.
Ah, are you out at the beach?
No, sadly, I'm in Hoboken today, but I'm actually going to Nantucket in a few days, and hoping to have a sighting of the elusive Robert Wright.
Oh, Robert Wright, our leader.
Yeah. Yes. The founder of Blogging Heads TV. He's
Oh, I can't hear you, John.
Oh, sorry, the founder of Blogging Heads TV. I keep forgetting to keep my cell phone near my mouth. So yeah, he goes up there around the same time that I try to go up there in the summer. Our families, my family and the family of Bob's wife, have been going up to Nantucket for like, I don't know, more than 40 years. So
Really?
yeah,
Wow, boy, so you go way back.
yeah.
Like that's pre-Bob.
Yes, even pre-Bob. No, Bob's wife I've known since she was, I don't know, 4 or 5 years old. Lisa,
Oh my
a
God.
wonderful person.
Did you have anything to do with introducing them, or is that coincidental?
That was coincidental, but then it was odd that she introduces me to this great guy that she met. This must have been, Jesus, like 30 years ago. And turns out that he's a science geek who shares some of my same interests. He was at the sciences back then.
That's right, I remember them. Yeah, the Sciences and then New Republic, I believe.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was around that time that he wrote Three Scientists and Their Gods,
right.
which is one of my favorite
Yeah,
books.
it's a great book.
Yeah.
All right, so
That's how I met Bob, actually.
through three scientists and their gods.
Yeah, I reviewed it for the New York Times Book Review, and then we ended up meeting after that. So,
I remember that you used the phrase "gonzo journalism," I think, to describe Bob's style.
well, I might have. I hope I tempered it a little.
Well, you definitely meant that as a compliment.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, totally positive. Long and positive review. Yeah,
Yeah,
maybe he was like Gonzo journalist of metaphysics or something.
yeah. Well, it was a style of journalism that I think you and I are very partial to, where the journalist, the science journalist, is not just trying to passively record the thoughts of these great
Ah,
people. He is very much active in shaping the narrative and injecting his own ideas
oh
into it.
yeah, and yeah, and in the famous Bob irony.
Yes, right.
That was my first introduction to it. No, I just loved that book. I just remember when it somehow came across my transom, and then started reading the galley, and I thought, wow, this is really great stuff.
Yeah, and it had some of the same themes that you and I have written about in in our books, sort of the
Yeah,
science as a kind of quest for meaning and the ultimate purpose of existence, and
yeah,
all these really grand questions, which
the drive to find order in the universe.
yeah, which we're all still trying to grapple with, and we always will be, I'm sure.
Well, yeah. Speaking of which, yeah, that was well, it was both a theme of one of my raw data columns, I guess my most recent one, and then also it sounds like it was this theme of that meeting that we talked about a little bit last time, where you met up with Rupert Sheldrake,
Hmm.
and then I was just reading your blog about George Ellis, who you also met, and
Yeah.
yeah, I'd met Ellis years and years ago in Cape Town.
Oh, really? You've actually been to South Africa?
Yeah, just once.
Uh-huh.
It's an amazing place. This was something. It was called the Parliament of World Religions.
Oh, I've heard of that.
It was this huge thing, and they had, like on the plane going out there, I was flying via Miami. God, 17-hour flight, I think, from Miami. And the plane was packed with people going to this conference. And it was everything from like American Indians, like Hopis, with long, like this guy with a big long braided hair, and Southern Baptists, blacks and whites, Southern Baptists, and I don't know if they were on the plane, but when we got there, there were some Chinese Buddhist nuns,
Mm-hmm.
with shaved heads and their gowns, and then there was a lot of Zulu youth singing their distinctive Zulu music, and all this big parade with all these different nationalities, and it was really inspiring. And I just thousands and thousands of people descending on Cape Town. And there was this guy, a professor at I think at Northwestern, maybe in Chicago, named Clifford Matthews, who had organized a panel on science and religion. And I had just written Fire in the Mind, so that was the reason I was invited to this. And George Ellis was one of the big names there. And he also took us and gave us a tour of the campus at Cape Town.
Well, so was everybody firebombing each other by the end of the conference?
No, it was all peace and universal understanding. And the only thing was there were some fundamentalist Islam demonstrators that had signs basically calling for a boycott of the conference because there's only one true God, and it was blasphemy for anyone to suggest otherwise and to get together and discuss their false gods while Allah was the only one.
Oh God.
Yeah, that was the only sign of this is a very extreme radical group, and there'd been a bombing a few days earlier in a different part of Cape Town, so we were a little nervous about that. And then Mandela was giving a big talk at the conference.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, this science and religion thing was just a little sideshow, off in a separate place. But it was interesting. Oh, and our friend Maggie Wertheim was there too.
Oh, right, Margaret Wertheim.
Yeah, Margaret Wertheim.
The great, really a terrific science journalist who's written a bunch of.
Yeah, oh, she's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, she just had written, I think, Pythagoras' Trousers.
Yeah, she also wrote a book called Pearly Gates of Cyberspace, and so she's always been fascinated, as we have been, by the overlap and divergences between science and religion.
Yeah, I mean, to me, science and religion have both arisen from the same kind of wired-in drive of the human brain that evolved to find patterns and to explain and predict things in the world around us. But it's just that they work according to different rules, and with religion, you're starting with your basic fundamental, which is a supreme being exists, very much like the supreme being usually that you learned about from your parents, or one that you picked up on later in life, and then you're going to explain everything in terms of that, no matter how much distortion that might take. And then you get parodies of science or pseudosciences like intelligent design. But, you also, it's also a means of exploring and finding meaning. It's just that it's not constrained in the way that science at its best is constrained, where you start with the assumption of no supernatural. And I guess, you start with your own philosophical platform,
Mm-hmm.
materialism, whatever you want to call it. Naturalism, there's different words for it and different connotations.
Yeah.
But that's what you were writing about in your blog post.
Yeah. I had heard of George Ellis before, and I knew him by reputation as somebody who was a major figure, particularly in understanding and applying general relativity. So he did a book that's now seen as a classic, called, I think it's The Structure of Space-Time, he co-wrote it with Stephen Hawking. It was published in 1973, and
way then.
Yeah, and Ellis has continued to be a major figure in thinking about the Big Bang and why the universe has the structure that we observe, and the forces and particles that we've discovered. And I wasn't really aware. I sort of vaguely knew that he was a Christian. I think he won the Templeton Prize a while back. But
Oh yeah, he did. Yeah, Quaker, right?
yes, he's a Quaker, but I didn't know that much about him. And then he was staying in the same mansion that I was staying in England at this wacky conference with
Yeah.
Rupert Sheldrake, and Carlo Rovelli was also there,
Oh
and
yeah,
Carlos
Loop
Frank.
quantum gravity.
Yeah, another cosmologist named Carlos Frank, who I'd met before. A really interesting
Mhm.
bunch of people. And there are a couple of things that struck me about George Ellis. One was that we immediately established that we were annoyed by some of the same trends in modern physics, multiverses
Yeah,
and string theory, and this sort of gradual drift away from empiricism
yeah.
in some realms of physics. And he was very annoyed at this idea that maybe falsification isn't that important after
Oh,
all.
Sean Carroll's thing.
Yeah, and and he was disturbed that the sort of experimental grounding of physics had been lost, and he actually participated in a session called the end of experiment or something like that, in which he
Mm,
was saying that no, it should not be the end of experiment. We
yeah,
need to get back to our empirical roots. But
yeah.
then he also was talking about sort of ethics and philosophy. He was very annoyed that there had been all this philosophy bashing by some very prominent physicists. So Lawrence Krauss is
Oh
one.
yeah, it's like a sport,
Yeah.
blood sport.
Stephen Hawking said some really nasty things about philosophy a few years ago,
Yeah.
and
Oh yeah,
even Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's this really amiable guy, did some
yeah.
philosophy bashing
Oh yeah,
in some online video recently.
yeah.
So people are just taking these cheap shots, and
Oh yeah, and it goes back. It goes back at least to Murray Gell-Mann and Richard Feynman.
right,
Making like disdaining. The whole idea is like, why are you wasting your time with this metaphysical explanation? And you're just because you're not smart enough to be physicists like us. That's
right.
sort of a flavor of a lot of it. But before we go on with that, did you see Sean Carroll wrote something recently in one of his blogs defending philosophy
Oh,
and
really?
saying that
Okay.
yeah, and coming out against physicists philosophy bashing, and I just had a chance to glance at it and kind of just saw that it existed, so I may not be characterizing it correctly, but it's worth looking at, I'm
All
sure.
right, so just because he's not keen on falsification in particular doesn't mean that he thinks that philosophy in general is a waste of time.
No, maybe so.
Well,
Yeah.
well,
I don't know. I mean, I'll have to read it. I probably shouldn't have mentioned it without reading it, but Sean's an interesting thinker, so
and yes, an exceptionally clear thinker, even if he's wrong.
yeah.
Uh,
Well, there's
so
well, you can say of all of us.
so
It's like
I
some of us are less clear about being wrong,
sometimes it
or we're
helps.
not even wrong.
Sometimes it helps to be obscure. People can't tell if you're right or wrong. Um,
Oh yeah, that's
so I did this Q&A with actually since we spoke, I did a Q&A with Rupert Sheldrake, who I met
Mhm.
at this conference, and which turned out to be very popular. I kind of expected that.
Oh yeah, I read that.
It's
Yeah.
gotten a lot of likes on my blog, and then I did a Q&A with George Ellis that I just posted a couple of days ago, and
Yeah, that's the one I just read. That's really good.
that's also becoming very popular, even though it's much more dense. There are even there's some technical terms
Yeah.
in it, and it's kind of, I don't know, heavier than the Sheldrake one, and of course
Yeah.
within a much more conventional perspective. But he very eloquently, I think, argues on behalf of philosophy and says that the great the founders of modern physics, Einstein and Bohr and people like that, were very
Yeah.
philosophically sophisticated and concerned with philosophical issues, how we know
Yeah.
reality and how we can assume certain things to be true, and what's the connection between data and the truth claims that we make based on that. I mean, these
Yeah.
issues became particularly urgent with the rise of quantum mechanics, which had such bizarre philosophical implications. But one thing that
There was a great, if you don't mind, there was an
sure,
exchange between the two of you that I'd like to read part of it that really struck me.
sure,
So you asked, you said Krauss, referring to Lawrence Krauss, Stephen Hawking, and Neil deGrasse Tyson have been bashing philosophy as a waste of time. Do you agree? And Ellis says, if they really believe this, they should stop indulging in low-grade philosophy in their own writings. You cannot do physics or cosmology without an assumed philosophical basis. You can choose not to think about that basis. It will still be there as an unexamined foundation of what you do. The fact that you're unwilling to examine the philosophical foundations of what you do does not mean that those foundations are not there. It just means they're unexamined.
yeah,
That's really, I mean, touche.
yes, it's and again, it's very very clear. The funny thing about Ellis is that in some ways he's this very gentle soul. He's a Quaker, and he's really a Quaker.
Yeah.
I mean, he lives that life, but he could be very tough.
Oh,
He's
that's what I saw.
I saw him in he has showed up for some of these events at this conference I went to, including one that I was involved in. I had this debate about string theory and multiverses and stuff like that with two physicists, and Ellis was pretty tough on these two physicists that I was with, and was challenging them on some technical points that they made. So he's not he's not a total pacifist intellectually.
Yeah, I didn't come away from meeting him years ago in Cape Town feeling at all that he was meek or humble or pacifistic or any of those things. I mean, he just seemed really very forceful.
Yeah, but I did want to point out something that makes me admire him even more. So I actually Googled him while I was in England, and I learned that he was very vocal and active in opposing apartheid when that was actually a very dangerous thing to do back in starting in the early 70s. And he ended up getting a major award from Nelson Mandela after apartheid was finally overthrown. And he's even
he's not just talk, he's really
that's right.
Yeah, no, impressive individual.
Yeah. So anyway, yes, that was enjoyable, and I thought some of the issues that came up in that post, and sort of these philosophical issues that, of course, arise in science, especially science as fundamental as particle physics and cosmology. You were dealing with those in your, I think it's your most recent column for
raw data
for the New York Times.
Yeah, that was it just came out. Oh, let's see, we're talking today is Thursday. It came out 2 days ago on Tuesday, and let me find it so I can remember what in the world I wrote about. But you know how that goes.
Yes, I do indeed.
Let's see. I have to go to my own website.
I know you mentioned. Well, the two figures I remember are Thomas Nagel, the philosopher who wrote and his book Mind and Cosmos, and then you said something nice about Max Tegmark, the multiverse enthusiast.
Yeah. So the headline was Beyond Energy, Matter, Space, and Time, and kind of the thing I was exploring. I just wanted to do this essay, and you we define Copernican as being this idea of unseating the very anthropocentric perspective of people when they think about the universe or anything. So basically Copernicus, by being among the earliest astronomers to suggest that the Earth was not the center of the cosmos, but rather the sun was, and we were kind of off to the side, orbiting around it. That's narrowly called the Copernican revolution, and of course it took Kepler and Galileo to really nail it. But but now the term is kind of used very generally. So you could say that the Darwinian revolution was Copernican in the sense that it displaced man as the focus of creation. So or even from the top of the evolutionary tree, it's not like everything is converging up to us, but we're just off on one of these twigs where we have these rather remarkable skills and things like consciousness and subjective experience. So, but anyway, so it just got me to thinking about how the Copernican concept applies not just in space, saying we're not the center of creation in any way, but also that not necessarily the time in which you and I and everyone we know is living is the time when we have all of the tools necessary to understand the universe. And that right now, the basic assumption is that everything in science comes down to mass or matter, energy, space, and time. And of course, that can be condensed further to mass, energy, and space-time, since those are unified in very different ways. But, I wanted to keep it as like the four fundamentals. And then what if there's a fundamental that we've left out? And then it occurred to me that in different ways, both Thomas Nagel's much maligned recent book, Mind and Cosmos, and Max Tegmark's recent book, scroll down for the title, but Our Mathematical Universe, that these both kind of play with that idea in different ways. So you have Nagel saying that somehow mind has to be included in the among the fundamentals. And of course, we talked about this last time, that whole idea then of panpsychism and speculating on whether there's some kind of, no one can imagine what it's like, but some kind of mind stuff, so that this would become absorbed into the scientific framework. So that, yeah, and also just reading the book, I just felt like it had really been, there's some very good and very honest, insightful reviews, but I think in general the book was kind of misrepresented.
Yes.
As, so do you agree with that?
Yeah, I wrote two different articles. I guess I was very sympathetic to the kinds of questions that Nagel was wrestling with. But I was a little disappointed that he didn't know the literature better, that he didn't mention, hey, George?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I was disconnected for a second.
Oh, no,
I'm sorry. I felt bad that I wanted him to know more about, information theory and about the it from bit.
Well, he did. He mentioned Stuart Kaufman in a footnote.
Okay, but he,
in passing, and I think maybe Brian Goodwin.
Yeah, it should have been more than a footnote.
I'm not hearing you.
Oh, now? Okay, are you hearing me now?
Yeah.
Okay, so I just wanted him to, I wanted to see Nagel playing with some of these ideas out there that had come from people who have some of the same concerns about the conventional materialistic framework that he does. David Chalmers, I don't think he mentioned David Chalmers anywhere.
No.
I think, the it from bit from John Wheeler, the great physicist, is definitely a player and inspirational in this area that, the idea of the participatory universe, that our consciousness somehow is in constant interaction with reality and is essential to it in some way.
He mentioned, but I think, so I can't remember who was there. There was just one footnote in which he just kind of, basically acknowledged the existence of some of this stuff, but without exploring it.
Right.
But I think I was kind of not, his purpose is more doing a philosophical kind of manifesto, but it seems like, there was one review I read that suggested that would have made the book a lot stronger.
Yeah.
And what struck me, too, is that I think so many people who haven't read the book and just heard something about it, mistake him for he's a complete atheist. He's as much an atheist as you or I.
Right.
And he thinks intelligent design is totally misguided. He believes in evolutionary theory very much. He admires what physics has accomplished, but he's just saying that, he has this feeling, and, this is metaphysical speculation, that there has to be something more to explain conscious beings like us arising and having our minds so in tune that we understand the universe. I mean, I'm very skeptical of that idea. I mean, some of it's like, we think we understand the universe because there's only certain things we can explore because of the limits of our minds, and I'm pretty comfortable personally with the idea of that we're flukes of the universe, and just I really like Stephen Jay Gould's idea that if you rewound the tape of evolution and ran it again, there probably would be nothing like us, or nothing, and maybe not even conscious beings on the earth. Mm-hmm. But he's part of a very respectable school that thinks there must be something that like almost a teleological kind of force that leads in a certain direction, so you get conscious beings capable of understanding the universe. And it's mystical, but it's not it's not an intelligent design at all.
Well,
I mean,
but
he made I think it was kind of a tactical error in the book of saying that he thought people like Michael Behe had been treated with too much disdain or something. So he said like good things about them, but then in turn saying that this clearly wasn't the answer, because you have to posit a supernatural creator, and he just totally thought that was just this arbitrary move, and he's really talking more about somehow expanding science in a way that it either needs to be or doesn't need to be. But very respectable, good philosophizing. And then it bothered me how he was just getting bashed by people who acted like he was
Rupert Sheldrake.
Yeah, but people are really interested in this stuff. I got, all the columns I've written, that's one of the ones that I've gotten the most emails and the most Twitter activity, and most of it by far positive. There are a few people that incredibly, to me, thought that I was writing propaganda for intelligent design.
Oh, Jesus.
I mean, I don't know how anyone could read that and think that. It just makes me wonder sometimes about, it's a terrible thing to say that somebody that criticizes your article has reading comprehension problem, but really, I mean, and anyone who knew anything about anything I'd ever written would just find that absurd. But that's what it comes down to. This, people just do these knee-jerk, canned reactions, and they don't think.
Well, this is, going back to your parliament of religion. There are certain people who are, this is all a competition, and they approach these issues like warriors, and they're so aggressive and just on the attack. Instead of even trying to understand, they're looking for something to criticize. And one of the problems I have, I think you and I both share a sense, we love science, that's why we're science journalists, but both of us share a sense of science as limited in certain ways, especially when it's confronting some of these ultimate mysteries. And there's this assumption on the part of some readers, some folks out there who are listening to the sorts of things that we write about, that we must be closet fundamentalists ourselves, or when in fact it seems to me the position that I've tried to stake out is honorable agnosticism, which seems to me to be overwhelmingly the most reasonable point of view that you can take toward this crazy world. I mean, much more than atheism or certainly any kind of fundamentalist religious point of view.
Yeah.
Anybody who thinks that they have all the answers to what's going on in this world, whether it's scientific answers or religious answers, is self-deluded as far as I'm concerned.
Well, it's the difference between science and scientism.
Right.
I mean, And it's clearly, I mean, remember one thing that Richard Dawkins said when we were at that seminar years ago at Cambridge, England, that Templeton seminar on science and religion, and Dawkins, was talking, he's just going, one after one and just demolishing all of the objections to, the objections of the, very, I don't know what to call them, not all religious people, but religious people who thought that there was something beyond science that you could only get at through religion. And his basic point, I think, if I remember right, was, there may be many things beyond our current understanding of the universe, and we may find them, we may not over the millennia or centuries or years, maybe sooner than we think, but these things are going to be found through science and empirical methods and posing hypotheses and testing them, or through historical sciences, where you come up with the best plausible framework rooted in science for things like the unfolding of the Big Bang or the unfolding of evolution. But and just because there's gaps and limits to science, that sure doesn't follow that religion is going to have the answers.
Okay, but here's the problem I have with Dawkins is that it's he will say that in certain settings, and I remember him saying those sorts of things, and he was in some respects quite reasonable and even humble on behalf of science at that particular conference, although he had some sharp words with certain people like Nancy Murphy and the theologian.
Oh yeah,
but
there were some real knockdown dragouts.
But here's the problem that I have with him. He has, I think, Dawkins also is so frustrated with the persistence of religion, and is so horrified even that there's some people who still turn to religion for answers, that he exaggerates the power of science to solve certain problems. And this is why he has become a fan of multiverse theories, which he actually talked about a little bit in our conference as well. And
I'm not hearing you again.
He's a fan of multiverse theories and some of these very far out speculations about how our universe came to be and why it has the particular form that we observe. And he wrote that ridiculous afterword for Lawrence Krauss's book, A Universe from Nothing, comparing Lawrence Krauss to Darwin, which is one of the all-time worst analogies in the modern history of science writing.
I mean, you and Ellis talked about Krauss's book, and for people who don't know the book, and Krauss is a great physicist, and a great guy, and an interesting writer, but he wrote this book basically saying, that the last big question, why is there something instead of nothing, or how did something come out of nothing, which is clearly not a question that it's possible to ever answer, within science from anything else, because you cannot step out of the universe by definition and then see what made the universe happen. It just happened. And, and then to claim that, so his thing was if certain rules of quantum mechanics and, the quantum fluctuations in the vacuum, which of course, as people who follow, as we physics fans know, the vacuum isn't empty, but it has these little bursts of energy coming in and out, particles coming in and out of existence, virtual particles, just quick enough to get through the Heisenberg loophole, but just this constant roiling virtual something, and just out of these fluctuations, according to quantum mechanics, you get the Big Bang. So therefore you solve why is there something instead of nothing, except as I think we pointed out in earlier discussions, and as Ellis pointed out in his interview to you, this assumes the pre-existence of the laws of physics. It assumes the laws of quantum mechanics, and then where did this stuff come from?
Right.
And then you're getting something else out of something, but you're still not getting something out of nothing.
Something what you said before about. See, I actually think it's possible that we can have a kind of limited solution to the mystery of why there's something rather than nothing, or why we live in this particular something. Let's just say that somehow we discover, aliens land on the White House lawn tomorrow, and they say, they are from the universe BXXQ next to ours, and our universe is an experiment that they created, in a laboratory. All right, physicists have talked this way, creating baby universes in laboratories. Andre Linde, the great cosmologist, told me that he first floated this idea past me about 25 years ago when I met him, that our universe is an experiment created by super intelligent people in another universe, and that even encoded in the structure of our universe and the laws of nature is some kind of message from our parents,
from our creators, from the teenage boy with the hyperdimensional Xbox.
Ooh, that's nice.
Probably teenage girl.
That's nice. But then you have the old regress problem of, well, where did our creators come from? Which, of course, is the same problem that you have with God, with any creation story. Where did so we were created by this thing or person, entity, whatever, and then where did that come from?
Yeah, and it turtles all the way down.
And I agree that I am a Mysterian when it comes to this issue, that I think this is just unsolvable. And
I'm totally with you there.
Yeah.
And there's nothing. Yeah, and I can see, since it is unsolvable, I can understand why some people, well, you have this gap where science stops. We've reached the edges of our rational minds, and then some people will, leap into, seeking some mystical experience, thinking maybe there's a way to get beyond what we can know with the rational mind. And it's, you can see why people are driven to do this, and why this might take the form of, adopting the same religion that they're familiar with from growing up, and thinking that, they're with these like-minded people that believe in some kind of spiritual something. I mean, it's not me. I mean, the word spiritual just kind of makes me cringe for some reason, but I can understand it, and I have good friends who've gone that way to some degree. But one thing they have in common is they are under no illusions that their answer would be some kind of ultimate only answer, that maybe all religions are sort of skirting around the same mystery. And I don't feel that optimistic about what they're doing, but I mean, it's part of the human drive to understand, and to just ridicule it, it's not going to make it go away. And there's cases where it does good things as far as social forces and social movements, and there's cases where it does absolutely horrible things. So how do you have one without the other? But I'm kind of with Dawkins too, with just kind of being astounded, thinking, what year was that the Time magazine did their famous cover saying God is dead?
Oh, like early 70s.
Yeah, and I thought, we're all beginning. Science is progressing. We're getting more and more educated. Education is spreading throughout the world, and religion's going to slowly get less and less, and then it's going to fade away into being this obscure little thing that a few curious souls participate in. And nothing like that's happened.
No.
I mean, to say the least, it's been the other way around. And of course, where I'm, again with Dawkins all the way, is when religious people are purporting to tell what science is, and saying, just based on an arbitrary system of religious beliefs, which includes intelligent design, which is just creationism. Someone on Twitter who was responding to my article had this great line. He described intelligent design as creationism in a cheap tuxedo.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, this was after someone from the Discovery Institute retweeted the tweet about my column and said complimentary things, which is like the kiss of death.
Oh.
He said something like, someday, this is, I can't remember, but, just implying that, this, someday we would look back and see these questions like Nagel was presenting as, being the key or something. That's not what he said, but it was kind of the idea. And I just thought, I just immediately answered. I said, no.
Yeah.
Intelligent design is creationist superstition, nothing more. And then he came back saying, oh, but have you actually read, the great founding documents, Michael Behe, and just the usual laundry list of this stuff, which all comes down to the same thing. Mm-hmm. You posit the existence of a supernatural creator and then try to show, the irreducible complexity that a cell can't possibly have evolved, and yet there's so many plausible scenarios by which that's exactly what could happen. Or you harp on, which is kind of what Nagel does, the fact that we haven't come really close to solving or having a consensus on how life began in the first place.
Yeah.
RNA versus DNA. But again, to me, what's wrong with just thinking it was just this amazing fluke? It might easily never have happened, but once it did, here we are, just like you win the lottery. It might have so easily not have happened, and yet.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to get back to Max Tegmark, because.
You're kind of fading out again.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to get back to Max Tegmark and how.
Because I also wrote about Tegmark, and for him, the missing ingredients is mathematics, and not only should it be included among the fundamentals, time, space, mass, energy, but that all of these arise from mathematics in some way that he doesn't pretend to know, but he has chapter after chapter of stuff on information theory and information physics you wrote something about Tegmark and had a little run-in with him, as I recall.
Well, he's a multiverse fan. When I wrote critically, skeptically about last spring about the claim that inflation had been confirmed by these observations of the microwave background at the South Pole, and Tegmark and others were saying that this was a big boost for multiverse theories, and I said basically bullshit. And then Tegmark posted a comment on my blog and compared me to creationists for being so close-minded about multiverse theory. And I said, so you're comparing my criticism of a theory that by definition can never have any empirical validation with another theory, a theory of evolution by natural selection, which is one of the most overwhelmingly corroborated theories of all time. You're trying to equate those two things. I mean, it was. I took it as just kind of a sporting competition with him. He seems like a really nice guy, but I think
he's a really nice guy.
I'm sure he is, but I just want to address this, this issue, this kind of number mysticism that you get in certain physicists, and it appealed to me a lot. I used to be really into it. The anthropic principle was actually inspired by musings of who was it, Brandon Dickey and some other fellow back in the 1950s.
Oh, right, Robert Dickey.
Robert Dickey, and then there was some other guy, Brandon something or other.
Oh, right.
And they were pondering some of these so-called numerical coincidences that arise in the constants of nature and so forth, and how if they were slightly different, then we wouldn't exist at all. And that you've also got Eugene Wigner talking about the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics. So there's this kind of going back to Pythagoras, this sort of veneration of mathematics, and that stuff, it used to intrigue me. Now it leaves me really cold. I mean, what is it? What does that tell us? What we really want to know? I mean, if you're looking for a kind of spiritual, if you want to call it that, explanation for the universe, it's got to be psychological. You're talking about a mind. What's the point of this? What's the point of existence? What was the motivation of whatever thing, creature, God, that in creating this? And what's the ultimate purpose of it? What's the point? Where are we headed? What's the goal? And those are questions about psychology. And and it raises then
you're cutting out.
It raises the problem of evil. And if you think that there's which is just totally inadequately addressed by any religion that I'm aware of, they just retreat into negative theology and say, well, God is inscrutable. We can't know anything about God's ways, and shit happens and all that kind of stuff, and which is almost identical to the view of atheist scientists that it's all just random and coincidence. So the information theories, the mathematical mysticism, I see those as basically unsatisfying as ultimate explanations as any of the religious stuff, even if they have the trappings.
It's metaphysics too. I mean, you're not going to be able to. I mean, Tegmark in his book apparently suggests ways that it supposedly could be tested, but they're very open-ended. And there was a really good review that I quoted by Edward Frenkel.
Yeah.
The mathematician who recently had a popular book out about mathematics, and he reviewed Tegmark's book, and really excellent. And then he points out a couple of interesting things, and one of them is actually of the mathematics that people have discovered or devised, depending on your point of view. If you're a Platonist, it's pre-existing and you're discovering this mathematical universe, and if you're more Aristotelian inclined, you're constructing the mathematics, and but of all of the mathematics, that one way or the other we've come upon, only a tiny, tiny portion of it we found applies to reality and physical laws.
Yeah.
And the rest appears to be about nothing except itself.
Right.
And that's what's it's so amazing about it, and what makes mathematics so fascinating for mathematicians. But and then there's a sense where there's certain relations we find, and then we can find mathematics is so vast, essentially infinite. So we can find some kind of mathematics that models to to any degree of precision some certain processes that we can do in experiments, but maybe it's no more mysterious than that. So, but then other times I think, nah, there's something deeper there.
I just have to point out that I was lucky enough to interview a mathematician who may be the greatest mathematician of the last 100 years. His name is Andre Weil, W-E-I-L. His sister was Simone Weil, the great mystic, Jewish-turned-Catholic mystic who starved herself to death in sympathy for the suffering of the world. And Weil,
I don't think I knew that was the same.
Yeah, brother and sister. So Weil, I actually was forced to do a profile of Weil as penance for my sins by Ed Witten. So Ed Witten, the great superstring theorist, was really annoyed by some things that I had written about physics, and that I had written sympathetically about the philosophy of Thomas Kuhn, which Witten thought was relativist nonsense. And so Witten demanded that I profile some mathematicians who really understand better than anybody what pure truth is. And he said he happened to be right down the hall at the Institute for Advanced Study from Andre Weil, and so I should quickly get over and interview Weil.
Yeah, hop on the train and go to Princeton.
Yeah, so I did.
You did it.
And here's the thing: I asked him this question about whether mathematical truths are discovered or invented, And
can't hear you again, John.
I asked Vey this whether mathematical truths are discovered or invented, and I expected him fully to be a Platonist, and he wasn't. He sort of he said, I said, are they where did they come from? And I'm pointing a finger at my head right now, and he said they come from here. From his own mind. He was extremely arrogant, and so I think for him, it would diminish his genius somehow to say that he was plucking them out of some kind of Platonic ether sphere.
Right.
But it.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
But yet, and yet, it's like,
but
what is mathematics, and what are patterns,
right?
And what are mathematical structures, and it's.
But you're right that when the closer we get to ourselves, the large scale structure of the universe and the structure of particles and so forth, their mathematical nature is really puzzling and mysterious. But then if when you get into biology, it's just so messy and kludgy and mathematically chaotic and anarchic, and especially when you talk about the human brain and consciousness, it's possible that there could be some beautiful, elegant algorithm or formula underlying consciousness, but I would bet anything against it. That mathematics will not help us crack the riddle of consciousness and the brain the way that it's cracked the riddle of the proton and the electron, or of the Big Bang.
Yeah.
But we'll see.
Yeah, I was hoping it would happen. By now.
Right.
Maybe another 20 years, but.
Hey, I wanted to bring up two things before we're done. We don't have much time left. One is, yesterday was a happy day for me because I got the paperback edition of my last book, The End of War. I'm holding it up to the screen now. This is from McSweeney's and Dave Eggers' publishing house.
Right.
And they did a fantastic job on the paperback. It's going to be for sale in about 2 weeks. This has got an index, which the original edition didn't have, and it's got a wonderful foreword by an anthropologist and friend of mine named Douglas Fry, who's really an authority on on warfare.
You've talked about him.
So I'm very excited about that.
Oh, congratulations.
And I'll probably be, when the pub date arrives, I'll be posting something on my blog about it. But I also wanted to briefly mention this conference that I went to just a few weeks ago in California.
Right.
There's an organization, a think tank called the Breakthrough Institute, which describes itself and is described by others as, there are various terms, neo-green, neo-environmentalist, eco-modernist. The basic idea, and it was founded by these two guys, Michael Schellenberger and Ted Norhaus.
Yeah,
and I actually interviewed Schellenberger for Blogging Heads TV, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And they have challenged some conventional environmental assumptions. They first became famous for their point of view when they wrote a paper called the End of Environmentalism or the Death of Environmentalism.
Oh yeah, it was a real manifesto, and it was just kind of saying, wasn't it that the environmental movement was taking the wrong tactics and unrealistic kind of Rousseauian sort of goals of going back to an earlier age when you have to take the inevitability of progress seriously, something like that?
Yes. So they think, one of the things that struck me most about their original essay, and then they expanded that into a book, and I brought
Oh,
them.
you're fading out on me,
They
John.
expanded that into a book, and I brought them to Stevens to talk about it at greater length with Andy
Yeah.
Revkin. But one of the things that they said that struck me was that humans only really start to give a shit about the environment, about nature, whatever that is, as opposed to their own selfish needs, when they reach a
Mm.
certain level of affluence.
Yeah.
And so that you need economic development for
Oh,
there to be a robust environmental movement, a robust grassroots
yeah. You need
concern.
educated people.
Yeah, and what that translates into also, they accused conventional environmentalists of being anti-industrialization,
Yeah.
anti-technology, anti-science. I mean, some of this is overstated to a degree, and they've been accused of setting up straw men. But I
Yeah.
think their
Yeah.
complaints are also legitimate, or even more. They're provocative. I think they're asking important
Yeah.
questions and sort of stirring the pot in ways that I think are productive. And
Yeah.
now they've become sort of a big deal. They have this dialogue every year out in California. This one was held in Sausalito. They're
Yeah.
based in Oakland, and there were several hundred people there. Lots of really interesting speakers. Andrew Morton was there, our old friend from The Economist. The first night I was there,
I'm sorry. Who was it?
Oliver Morton, excuse me.
Oh, Oliver Morton. Yeah, no, New Scientist and later Nature.
The Economist.
Oh, The Economist.
Yeah.
The Economist. Right. Right. Right.
And I sat right across the table my first night there at dinner from Stuart Brand.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So
Portala Institute. Well, yeah, yeah, Sausalito is his home base.
So one of the things, and Stuart Brand is typical. He's a kind of guiding light for the Breakthrough Institute, and
Yeah.
so he is one of the first environmentalists who said that we need to reconsider opposition to nuclear power, and that nuclear
Right.
power is actually
Right.
essential for combating global warming, and that's a
Yeah.
position of the
Yeah.
Breakthrough Institute. They're also pretty
Yeah.
keen on natural gas and even fracking, because they say that, I mean, basically it comes down to there being better than coal,
Better than coal.
producing
Yeah.
less pollution
Yeah.
and fewer greenhouse gases than coal.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. That's a dilemma.
It is a dilemma. The most radical thing that they said, and this was the theme of this conference, was that instead of trying to think of ways to curb our energy consumption, which especially in the
Mm.
United States is extremely high, it's higher here than anywhere else in the world, we should think
Yeah.
about a world in which we use.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you
We
again.
should think about a world in which we use much more energy.
Yeah.
And that by using more energy, we can decouple ourselves from nature, and preserve nature, and have these communities, very high density cities. This is how I imagined it, maybe powered by solar and nuclear. You can have these vertical factory farms producing the food,
Yeah.
very kind of,
Using less land and very.
yes,
It sort of sounds like some of like Corbusier, the architect, and his utopian skyscraper cities that he proposed earlier in the 20th century, and
oh really,
yeah, self-contained with the gardens in the middle and the tall high rises with little communities of like maybe 4,000 people per building, and all having their little farm and garden plots and in the middle, and yeah, building up instead of out.
that's it.
Yeah, but some of it, you start thinking about it, and it starts to sound like Blade Runner
Yeah.
when it goes wrong.
Right.
But that's interesting that this is coming back on the table.
Well,
High-tech utopian communities, okay, decoupled from nature.
Well, one of the reasons why this seemed plausible to me is that they gave an award on the first day of the conference to this guy named Jesse Ausubel, who.
Oh yeah.
So I actually, I'm sorry to say, I wasn't aware of his work before this conference.
Yeah, I think I knew him in some other context, but somehow I've met him through some Santa Fe Institute thing, or maybe it was the Rockefeller Foundation.
He's been at the Santa Fe Institute quite a bit. He's given a bunch of talks there, and he might even be one of their, whatever it is, associates. And as far as I can tell, he's kind of a polymath. He's an expert in lots of different things. But he presented a talk basically about how, because of various energy-consuming technologies, we now, our usage of land, in spite of the growth of population around the world, has leveled off. Our use of water has leveled off, and then he sort of rattled through a bunch of other natural resources. And so he's saying that and this has happened without any intention behind it. And so he says that if we can kind of direct this process and try to accelerate it, that some of our environmental problems might take care of themselves. Anyway.
Okay. No, I mean, I find it interesting, and I wasn't really aware of Nordhaus until about a year ago, and I met his sister, Hannah Nordhaus, who had, turns out that they're from an old Santa Fe family, and Hannah and her family lives in Boulder, and I met her at some kind of science writer, environmental writer kind of retreat that we had up above Boulder at a climatic research station up there, and she was kind of talking about some of her brother's stuff, and she said she's a science writer as well, and wrote this interesting book about the collapse of the bee colonies and things.
Oh yeah,
yeah. But when you were just talking about, and especially the decoupling from nature with these cities, it reminded me that a friend of mine referred me to an article that was in that website IO9. It's "We Come from the Future" is the subtitle, and there's this woman, Annalee Newitz, and she just recently wrote a book. It has this interesting title that I'll have to dredge up from my mind, but it sounded really interesting. But anyway, this was a feature called 10 Failed Utopian Cities That Influenced the Future. And we have like the Octagon City, the vegetarian utopia, and the idea that the octagon was the structure where you could have the maximum amount of light in a building, the maximum number of windows, and then Le Corbusier, a French-Swiss architect, one of the great forefathers of modern architecture, and glass box kind of skyscrapers, and Tom Wolfe wrote this great book, tearing all that apart. But he had the Machine City, and it was based on an idea he called purism. And architecture, he believes, should be as efficient and simple as the industrial machines that have ushered in the modern age. And then he has this picture of one of his drawings of these skyscrapers with these parks in between, the vertical garden city with the social plan. So lots of natural light and air is let into these multi-story apartments, and they're the center of social life with rooftop gardens. There's beaches and catering in the basement, professional child care for each family, and each building would contain 2,700 people working 5-hour days, using public transit that delivered them right to their homes. And there's just one after another like this. There's the garden city, the green metropolis, and a lot of them have the same kind of idea where technology is embraced as this progressive thing that can improve the environment.
And all the workers, the troglodytes, are down in the caverns doing the hard work where they don't have to be seen by the elite.
Well, I don't think that was part of the idea. But scrolling down, I was just reminded that number 5 is Germania, the Nazis' modernist dream.
Oh, whoops.
It says architect Albert Speer was put in charge of bringing Hitler's plan to transform Berlin into a futuristic capital of the Nazis' reality.
Oh, shucks, and they never got a chance to do that.
Ugh. See, there we go into Blade Runner kind of dystopias. So it's that thin line between utopia and dystopia.
Well,
Wow, that was kind of quite a tangent from.
okay, I think you need to go to the Breakthrough Institute dialogue and inject a little of your hard-nosed realism into it next year, George.
Okay, no, I'd love to go. I would love to because no, I really find this stuff fascinating. And you mentioned in your column about this, that Andy Revkin is kind of a sympathizer, and Keith Klure, who's this really interesting environmental blogger, Discover Magazine.
Yeah, listen. It was there were some really smart people at this conference. I'll post.
Sounds great.
I'll put a link to it on my when we post this chat here. And I mean, it was one of the most stimulating conferences I've ever been to. And
Oh, that sounds great.
and I hope I get
yeah,
invited
it sounds
back.
like you've been to two. Yeah, two just really great ones. That and the one with Sheldrake and Ellis.
Yeah, it's been a fun summer so far.
That's great. Wow.
Hey, listen, we're well over an hour.
Oh yeah, 1:06 and 19 seconds by my clock.
Yeah. So so I guess we should wrap it up and
Yeah.
and enjoy the rest of your summer. Maybe I'll talk to you in late August or something.
Yeah, late August or September, and that's great. Yeah, and say hi to Bob.
I will.
Okay.
All right. Bye, George.
Bye.